All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, as I'm sure you all know by now, the New York Times has beclowned themselves even more than usual Sunday evening with their dual endorsement of Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. Obviously, this will have absolutely no impact on how any voters actually conduct themselves on Election Day, but it tells us quite a bit about the elite media and what the candidacies of Klobuchar and Warren really mean. Let's start with the Times itself. In their endorsement, they write that where the candidates differ most is not in what they would do, but instead how it would actually get done. They declined to take a position on whether the moderate Amy Klobuchar or the supposedly progressive Elizabeth Warren is the best way forward for the country. They focused instead on their dual love of proceduralism. Of Sanders, they write that, quote, compromise is anathema to him, and that, quote, 3 years into the Trump administration, we see little advantage to exchanging one overpromising divisive figure in Washington for another. Thank God, they say then, when Elizabeth Warren has emerged, and that she has a, quote, serious commitment to policymaking. Let me translate that for you. They like Elizabeth Warren because they see her as a person most likely to give up principles in favor of cobbling a piece of legislation together, which is certainly true if you look at her handling of Medicare for All. And they reject the movement politics of Trump and Sanders because the Times has more of a fetish for a piece of paper with the word plan written on top of it, rather than understanding how political change actually works in this country. The populist uprising of embrace of uncompromising figures like Sanders and Trump is an explicit rejection of proceduralism and is instead a nod to the idea that voters have to get pretty radical if they want to get even 10% of what we want. For decades, politicians have preached incrementalism and deal-making, and for decades, we've understood that incrementalism and deal-making almost always skews in favor of the moneyed elite. Since the Times is itself a member of the moneyed elite, their endorsement and embrace of Warren is devastating. It validates that the central critique that she is herself not an ideologue and in reality would mostly masquerade as a far-left cultural figure who issues woke executive orders every day of her presidency. The same is true of Klobuchar, who they write nauseatingly, quote, the senator from Minnesota is the very definition of Midwestern charisma, grit, and stick-to-itiveness. They endorse her because they see her as a witting heir to the moderate Democratic movement, which, as far as I can tell, is because she's been in the Senate for a while, says word Midwest a lot, and is a woman. What the Times has done with this endorsement is show us, above all, the emptiness of their governing ideology and that of their upper-middle-class white subscriber base that it really represents. They don't care about ideological differences between Klobuchar and Warren. They don't support either for their policy prescriptions, but instead for the cultural figures that they represent, which, as I snarkily said on Twitter yesterday, is really just these lame emojis. You won't hear me stick up for Joe Biden often, but the complete erasure of the working-class support for Biden and Sanders in this endorsement is shameful. It's a paper that once aspired to be the definitive record for the entire country. Only 2 of those candidates have any real cross-racial working-class support amongst the Democratic electorate. And the true irony is that the supposed Democratic bastion of the New York Times cannot even understand the working-class people that they employ like this one.
I'm great. I love you.
Thank you.
I do. You're like my favorite of my...
Thank you so much. What's your name?
Jacqueline.
You got a camera? As we get out, we'll take one, okay?
You are awesome. Oh, my God.
That's a human moment that they would never understand, Crystal. It's something that their erasure of even one of their own employees in favor of this like fetishized proceduralism. It's astounding, and it's amazing the way first of all, who can't pick between Klobuchar and Warren, right? It's like, first of all, that's like how an endorsement is supposed to work. But really what it is it's like this fetishization of the like big women going out and like participating as part of neoliberalism. And they don't want to pick as to which one that will actually do anything about it. They just want to elevate them in the conversation to a system, to further a system that works to their benefit.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Warren being equated with Klobuchar was exactly the endorsement she was looking for here.
Yeah.
And it is amazing. I'm so glad you point this out. That, I mean, Warren's coalition is overwhelmingly white and affluent. Klobuchar's coalition, to the extent that she even has one, is also overwhelmingly white. So you've just completely erased the working class. You've completely erased the diversity of the Democratic Party. Of course, no one's going to call them on that, even though it's so.
They're like, no, but the Times editorial board is super diverse. It ain't diverse in terms of salary and in terms of cultural interest. I can tell you that.
That's it. And they don't even try to understand what the appeal either of Biden or Bernie would be. They dismiss basically both of them as too old. That's part of it. It's just a blatantly ageist argument. And then with Bernie, they make up something about how he's divisive. Actually, in fact, he's the most popular senator in the country, and how he doesn't compromise, which also just legislatively, if you look at his record, he's known as the Amendment King. He worked with Republicans to reform the VA. I mean, that's just factually inaccurate. I mean, look, the New York Times editorial board was never going to endorse Bernie Sanders. Let's not delude ourselves
it's about
there.
how they do it.
But I think when he told them that he wasn't going to call them on their birthday, I think that was it. They're like, "How dare you, sir?"
It was funny. I just think that the whole thing is so revealing of the Times and like its ideology. It really is the paper of record for the professional managerial class. That's it.
That's what it is.
And they represent their interests. They no longer purport to report the facts properly in order to give us an unbiased view of the world. It's neoliberalism incarnate, and that's all they care about. And that's really what encapsulates a dual Klobuchar-Warren endorsement, because what do those two things have in common? Which is neither is a fundamental critique of the system, or at least in terms of Biden, a calling of old. Like they want to embrace like progressivism in terms of moving forward, but they want to keep our economic system in place while being like, yeah, we understand that people are kind of upset, so let's paper over it with some nice deals and plans and all of that.
It gives away the game, because the reality is probably Klobuchar and a Warren administration wouldn't be all that different. I mean, since they essentially have, what I love is the New York Times sets this up as like, oh, there's two, they didn't use the terms theories of change, but that's basically what they were saying. There's two theories of change within the Democratic Party, so we're going to pick one candidate from each. No, you picked two candidates who very much operate within the system, within the typical theory of change, who are on the same spectrum, and you just completely dispatch with the other theory of change that exists within the Democratic Party. And it totally exposes how fundamentally similar those two administrations would ultimately be, and who the New York Times is playing to. And it also undercuts their power, because neither one of them is going to be the nominee. So they've rendered themselves also irrelevant, which does a disservice to their readers too, rendered themselves irrelevant ultimately to how this process unfolds.
Yeah, exactly. It used to be at least they would go with the pragmatic choice, but this time they wanted to be aspirational, and I think they come out looking very foolish as a result.
And weak.
Yeah.
And weak and lame. That's what I would say.
All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.